everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's workshop on decarbonizing pharma pathways to net zero in the Indian pharmaceutical sector. This workshop is a part two of our three-part series on sustainable pharmaceutical manufacturing. My name is Chavinder Kuar and I am from BSI marketing team. I am here to facilitate this session. Uh, Before we start the session, I would like to welcome all of you who joined this workshop. This is the workshop where we bring together thought leaders, expert, and change maker to share their knowledge and experience. And before we start, I would like to give you some ground rule, requesting you all to please keep yourself in the mute mode during the workshop presentation session. And if you have any question, please feel free to type your question in the question box or chat box on the control panel. Our speaker will do their best to answer as many questions at the end of the workshop. And if due to time limit your question are not answered, then we will provide them after the workshop with the webinar recording. So before we dive into the agenda, I would like to take a moment to introduce our distinguished speaker who's present to truly elevate the value of this workshop. Each of them brings a wealth of experience and unique insight that will help us explore today's themes from multiple angles. So first of all, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Ms. Courtney Soulsby. She is Global Director for the Healthcare and Life Science sector at BSI. With over a decade of experience working across pharmaceutical and medtech industry, Courtney brings deep insight into healthcare sustainability, regulation, and supply chain risk management. We are honored to have her with us today. Our second speaker, Ishan Mehrotra. He is a client manager sustainability for India, PSI India. He is a GRI certified sustainability professional with over a decade of experience in carbon footprint verification, sustainability reporting, and ESG standard. Ishan has supported net zero initiative and led multiple assurance and training engagement across global sustainability framework. And we are glad to have his expertise with us today. Our third speaker, Dr. Prashant Venela. He is a healthcare sector development manager for BSI India. He is a seasoned medical and management expert with specialization in quality management, infection control, and public health program. An oral surgeon with an MBA in healthcare management, Dr. Venela is also an ISO certified auditor and Lean Six Sigma professional with strong expertise in telemedicine and medico-legal healthcare practices. And again, we are glad to have his expertise with us today. With that, I would like to get it started. Now, I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Ishan Mehrotra, to present. Over to you.
Thank you, Chavinder. Hope I am loud and clear.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. First of all, I would like to start by once again thanking all of you for taking out the time and joining this webinar, which is revolving around the introduction and the in-depth of sustainability in the pharmaceutical sector, thinking from an angle of carbon accounting first. My role will be to set up the context, talk about some drivers at large, and just to give you an insight that why carbon accounting is becoming very important for pharmaceutical these days. When it comes to the flow of this webinar, we will talk about by starting the context on India as well as at the global level. We will also talk about some key survey results that we have obtained about the current state in the companies and pharma space, about their scope 1, 2, and 3 journey. And we would like to engage you also in the discussion by having some questions to better understand your challenges in your carbon accounting space. So let me, without any delay, let me start by setting up and discussing with you, first of all, what falls under the ESG pillars for pharmaceutical sector. This slide, it's a gist of the some of the pharmaceutical companies and the materiality topics which falls under environmental, social, and governance. So when I read them, some of the important topics under environmental, it's carbon management, sustainable R&D, sustainable packaging and materials. When it comes to social, it's drug accessibility and affordability, be it ethical clinical trials. When it comes to governance, it's regulatory compliance, quality assurance, data privacy. These are those topics which some of the leading companies they say it material. And when I say it material topic, it signifies that although all of these companies they have a focus towards managing these topics on priority, they are already taking actions because they uh, envision them important topics for their business sustainability as well as for the sustainability for the outside world. So these are the key topics where priorities of the pharma companies comes into picture. When I highlight the environmental basket of these pillars, if I can request Courtney to move on to the next slide. When it comes to the environmental basket of this ESG pillars, all of the initiative, if we talk about, be it focusing on the principles of green chemistry, efficient and continuous manufacturing, solvent alternatives, renewable energy introduction, waste management, be it single-use plastic alternatives for blisters, etc., they all support towards somewhere in managing the carbon emissions itself. And they largely, when any organization taking initiative in these steps, they are all doing carbon management. But from where the push is coming, we need to actually understand this as well. So for understanding the push coming in the Indian market, we need to recall this particular slide in front of us, which talks about the commitment given by Indian government at global level. Our Prime Minister has given a commitment at COP26, which held in Glasgow, that he came up with the five nectar elements that he mentioned, which is a vision Panchamrit or a Panchamrit action plan. If we see that Panchamrit action plan or five nectar elements, the last two important ones are, one is achieving the target of net zero emissions by 2070 and reducing the carbon intensity of the economy by 45% by 2030 comparing to 2005 base levels. And when we see that Indian government is ambitious and interested in these taking up this net zero and carbon related actions, if I can request Courtney on the next slide, then when government is serious about net zero, what is your perception? Where this will be translated to? Definitely, this net zero term is industry agnostic, but when we talk about pharma space, this will be leading to pushing pharma companies for carbon management, focusing on efficient manufacturing, requirements like zero liquid discharge. And when we see the Indian market right now, don't you think that the requirements or compliances like BRSR or EPR regulations for packaging are not the reflection of the government ambition? No, it is the reflection of the government ambition only. If we see the BRSR part, which is a mandatory ESG reporting requirement for top 1,000 listed organization in the stock exchange, out of which there are some pharma companies as well, there is a very clear cut focus on principle 6 in BRSR, which is very lengthy and which talks about organizations to come up with the response against some written prioritized KPIs like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emission, waste, water, etc. So these compliances coming up in India, they push the Indian market to come up with some more action plans for taking up and talking about carbon accounting as some of the fundamental steps in the journey of sustainability. Now, I would request Courtney also to speak up a little about the global drivers within Indian pharma, because India being a major exporter for the world when it comes to the pharmaceutical as a sector. Over
Thanks,
to Courtney.
Ishan. Thanks, Ishan. And I think it's a really good perspective to talk about how the link with the India market then relates to the global drivers. So I'm in a fortuitous position to be able to see the different drivers that are happening from three real major stakeholder groups that are coming to drive greenhouse gas emissions and environmental sustainability in into the pharma sector specifically. So there's the regulators, there's the investor community, and then the customers, the license holders, who are driving requirements through the procurement. So I think that from a regulator perspective, there's definitely a recognition to focus on sustainability in the supply chain. I've heard stories about scope creep where some regulators are starting to ask about waste management and their GMP inspections, for example. The European Medicines Agency has a draft environmental risk assessment clause that they're considering out for consultation very shortly. There's also, out of the EU broadly, look at sustainable use of resources like the Battery Waste Directive, for example, who are in a lot of the combination devices that we're seeing here. And then again, a recognition and some research being done both within EMA and FDA on green chemistry regulation. The investor community is a bit more high level, looking at things like ESG practices, sustainable development goals, looking at globally accepted ratings like CDP or SBTI, the Carbon Disclosure Project, or Science-Based Targets Initiative, that are enhancing investor confidence. I'm going to talk a little bit about a pharma-specific initiative called Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable, which is a group of investors and pharma organizations coming together to figure out what is best in ESG reporting. And then I'm sure you're feeling the pain from healthcare systems and also from license holders who are asking for ratings like CDP, EcoVadis, SBTI, but also initiatives like PSCI, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, the Manufacturing 2030 program, where they're looking at carbon accounting specifically. There's a new standard that I'll talk about in a minute around lifecycle assessments for medicines. And then there's also a global initiative called Sustainable Markets Initiative, where there's a health task force really honing in on the pharmaceutical market and the drivers for progressing greenhouse gas emissions. And then also in the hospital setting, the healthcare system setting, there are a more focus on green procurement requirements when procuring medicines as well, which we'll touch on briefly. So it's a multi-phased kind of approach that you can start to use these pieces of information to help with your business case internally, and how we can actually gain budget and resource allocation by outlining what these three stakeholders, which I know your leadership team will be very concerned about, how they are starting to ask about sustainability. So to first start, I'll just give a real picture of the global recognition that the healthcare sector has a significant impact on the environment. So the healthcare and life sciences sector accounts for about 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than the aviation sector, more than the automotive sector. So it's very significant proportion of the global accounting of greenhouse gas emissions. So that has resulted in quite a lot of focus on GHG accounting and reporting and reduction in this sector. You see here on the right-hand side, there is this, okay, so where are those emissions coming from? And so NHS England, for example, is one of the leading health systems looking at this topic. And they have identified about 65% of their NHS England carbon footprint comes from their supply chain. And about 30% of those are specific procurement of medicines and medtech products. So the focus that they are really shifting is how do they start to incentivize or ask procurement requests related to medicine and medtech procurement requirements. So to go a little bit further into this, we just the customers, the global market drivers from the customers. I'm going to take a minute to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Markets Initiative. So this is a CEO-led initiative from the top 9 global pharmaceutical companies. So AstraZeneca, Pfizer, J&J, GSK, and Novo Nordisk, and Takeda, and Novartis. The big pharma companies that are license holders in many countries now have aligned on what are they asking their suppliers, and what is the targets that they are asking from their suppliers related to sustainability. So this is a screenshot of the letter that was sent as an open letter from the CEOs of these pharma companies. And for example, some of them are directly related to greenhouse gas emissions. So it has asked for the assessment and disclosure of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions by 2025. It also says by 2025, this year, to commit to near-term targets aligned with the SBTI 1.5 degree pathway. And it also has asked to set standards for their own suppliers. So for the tier 1 suppliers of the license holders to also embed it in their own supply chains and targets for their own suppliers. So I think it shows the leadership of the industry is really focusing on this topic, but also B, the clarity with which the supply chain needs to start taking action now. Additionally, in addition to the license holders, I know Indian pharma manufacturers are also directly exporting to Europe to the healthcare systems. So, for example, in NHS England, they have developed a net zero supplier roadmap where they already are asking for carbon reduction plans from all suppliers now. And that's all procurement that they're doing. And by 2028, so in less than 3 years from now, they are actually going to be asking for carbon footprint of individual medicines. So through life cycle assessments. So they're already giving notice that in 3 years' time, they're going to be asking for carbon footprinting of products individually. And France, that's already happening now. So they had less of a lead time and ramp up, but France has France's healthcare system has launched a product carbon footprint requirement now. It's live in their upcoming tenders. And again, that shows the enhanced focus, I think, on greenhouse gas emissions specifically coming from the industry and the healthcare systems at the top of the chain. So that was just a couple of screenshots of the specific healthcare systems. Here is an example of where the leading healthcare systems in which countries. So I always find it useful to actually start to map geographically where are the requirements coming from and where are your export markets. So you can see here some of the leading countries are Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and England. They're being deemed pioneers, asking for green procurement in their procurement of health technologies. France and Spain are fast followers. Again, I know Spain is looking at ISO standards as the basis of their requirements. France, again, I talked about their product carbon footprint. And then newcomers onto the scene are Finland, Italy, and Australia. So there is a big focus in a number of different Western European geographies on green procurement requirements for procuring medicines. And again, just should help with your business cases internally. And then there's also in the World Health Organization, a big enhanced focus through a program called ATTACH. It's an acronym really just to show the focus on Alliance for Action on Climate Change. And there's a number of different thematic working groups, and one of them is focusing on the supply chain specifically. So in the action group for the supply chain from WHO ATTACH, they have actually outlined that they need sustainable criteria for products and services that they're procuring, like medicines, through things like life cycle assessments. And they have an objective of creating collective demand for sustainable products and supplies. So again, it's further emphasizing. Actually, we were mentioned in the last year's WHO ATTACH annual event right at the beginning of their program and introduction alongside UNEP and SBTI. So there's some work we're doing with that organization to help really drive progress in standardization in this space. And then final slide for me around the global drivers and market opportunities is the financial investment community. I mentioned that the financial investors are really starting to hone in on the biopharma sector specifically. So this image here on the right-hand side is from the group that I mentioned before called the Biopharma Sustainability Roundtable Initiative. They have created an ESG communication guidance that has been agreed upon between the investor community and the biopharma ESG reporting persona. And there are 12 principles essentially being attached now to what should be included in ESG communication. And you can see on the left-hand side, or in bold and black, 3 of them are directly related to the topic today of supply chain management, environmental impacts, and climate change. So it does have to be included in your ESG reporting, and it is important to the investor community. So thanks, Ishan, for bringing up some of the local Indian market context. Hopefully I've been able to bring some of the global context as well on where the drivers are coming from: regulators, investors, and ultimately healthcare systems and license holders.
Yeah.
So now I think we're going to get really into the discussion. So hopefully you're awake, you're listening, you're ready to contribute. We're really going to turn to you shortly to start to ask some questions. We're going to really get into the topic of greenhouse gas emissions, accounting, reporting, and reduction. So I'll introduce this and then turn it over to Ishan, but we're going to talk about 3 main categories. We're going to talk about organizational buy-in, budget, and functional responsibility of greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to talk about scope 1 and 2 versus scope 3, where the maturity of the industry is and what various practices are being adopted. And then we're also going to get into product level lifecycle assessments, or LCAs. And the data that we are going to talk about in these 3 categories is actually the data that you completed in the pre-workshop survey. So it was commissioned by us, BSI. I'm really, really impressed and proud that there are over 50% response rate from the registered participants. So we had 45 people register for the event, and we had about 26 respondents, but 23 individual organizations. So there were a couple companies that had multiple responses for their organization. So we have a quite good representative sample, I would say, to talk about where the industry is at from a maturity perspective in India, specific to these 3 categories. So this is where we hope to really start to present some of this data back to you, but also get your views on how this fits within your organizational context. So I think the first thing, over to Ishan, is to do the first poll.
Sure. So I would request Chavinder if you can launch this poll question on the screens of the participants so they can submit their responses within 25 to 30 seconds, and we can then discuss further. You will be getting a poll on your screens. I would request to use your click buttons to submit your responses. The very first question is, does your organization is currently calculating the carbon emissions? Over to all the participants. Chavinder, is the poll closed already? Okay, yeah. So we have a mix of responses which says that the majority of the organizations are actually recording it. They are doing their carbon inventory. That's good to hear. But some of the organizations require capacity building as well when it comes to their carbon accounting. So can we move to the next slide, Courtney?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ishan. So I hope this is, if you were to pay attention like to any part of the presentation today and engagement today, I think really this is new information we're presenting to you here. And we're going to ask some key questions straight after this slide. So again, I'd really request your attention and participation coming up right now. So we went through all of the different, like I said, 26 different survey responses from you, the industry, that responded to the survey. The first category we're looking at is, what level of organizational buy-in do you have within your company? What resource do you have allocated to greenhouse gas emissions accounting? And what is the functional responsibility? Who actually has responsibility for this in your business? So we've got some really interesting stats here to present to you today. So the first around resource allocation and time commitment. I think what was interesting to me is that about 15% of the respondents say they have less than one full-time employee looking at greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting. 19% of the respondents said that they have 2 to 4, and 12% said that they have 8 to 12 full-time employees engaged in greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting. So quite a variety is the moral of the story here. There's some that have less than one, a proportion, 20% saying 2 to 4 and 12% saying 8 to 12. So we have like quite a range of resource allocation that varies by industry, by company. And then of those who indicated they have resources, we also asked them about the time commitment. So the time of those resources that are allocated, 23% of you said that less than 25% of their time is allocated towards greenhouse gas emissions and reporting. So while you may have full-time headcount, they're actually only spending about less than 25% of your time. And then there was some 27, nearly 30% of you indicated that those full-time resources are spending between 25 and 50% of their time. So even if we have hired the right people, they're still not really taking full amount of their time and effort into the accounting and reporting of emissions, which I think is an interesting finding that we had from the survey results. The part that we wanted to talk about was related to organizational buy-in. So we looked at organizational buy-in for scope 1 and 2 and organizational buy-in for scope 3. So for scope 1 and 2, 21% of the respondents of the survey said leadership and full business buy-in was achieved. So both across the business and within the leadership. And then 35% said that they have leadership buy-in, but are still working to get buy-in from across the business. So again, it seems like quite a high, 20% saying, leadership and full business, and 35% saying they at least have leadership buy-in. So over 50% have leadership buy-in, is the moral of the story here for scope 1 and scope 2. It's different for scope 3 though. So here we have said that there's 12% have reported that they have leadership and full business buy-in, while 38% said they have leadership buy-in but don't have buy-in across the business. And that's a bit higher than scope 1 and 2. And I imagine that's probably because of the complexities with procurement. Again, having to get buy-in from the procurement team for scope 3 emissions, I know is a headache for the group. The other part that I thought was interesting from the survey results was who is functionally responsible from a division perspective. So here we have scope 1 and scope 2. We see that for scope 1 and scope 2, 30% are allocated from the EHS department. So already existing resources in EHS. And then 42% have now a dedicated sustainability function, which again, I thought was an interesting indicator of maturity that 42% of the industry does have a sustainability function dedicated to this topic. It changes slightly with scope 3, where you start to have procurement getting engaged. So with procurement being involved, about 15% of the functional responsibility for procurement is dedicated towards this task. 27% to the sustainability function, and EHS function representing only 15% in this area. So as you get to scope 3, the functional responsibility starts to diversify between the different companies, which I thought was an interesting finding again, that once you start to get to the complexity with the suppliers. And then the other point I'll make before we move on to the discussion around this topic is related to budgetary responsibility. So actually, I thought it was quite a good sign that 41% of people in the pharma industry have indicated that they have annual budgets allocated towards greenhouse gas emissions specifically. So nearly 50% have dedicated budgets just for greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting. So it shows that I think this is a growing topic, that you're getting dedicated budget. My hope is that you're going to be able to use some of these statistics to start to benchmark your own organization and where you are at. But I think really, if I can turn over to Prashant briefly to go and start to introduce the discussion now. Oh, Prashant, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and I hope I'm audible. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Courtney and Ishan, for setting up the context. Now that we have discussed about ESG, carbon footprint, market drivers locally as well as globally, and Courtney has also brought up the WHO aspect of attach and how much amount of organization buy-in and resources allocated is happening for EHS sustainability and procurement as well. So putting all of them into one context and seeking your answers for very basic questions, which are there right now on the screen. I'll just try and moderate this Q&A, little bit of Q&A session. So we just want your 100% participation. Let it be very interactive. Please share your experiences. So going into the questions, the first question is, what are the barriers to gaining buy-in across the organization for EHS, for ESG, for all the sustainability related aspects? What are the barriers that you think are kind of stopping you in getting into this?
Good, that's great. Thanks, Prashant. Yeah. Can we pause there? Anyone, I would love anyone to come in. This is supposed to be like, we titled it workshop because it is supposed to be interactive. So I'd welcome anyone to come in and talk about some of the barriers they're experiencing from gaining buy-in.
Hi, myself Ravi Kiran
Thank
from
you.
Sun Pharma. Generally, don't think that I'm representing only Sun Pharma, but generally I've seen 3-4 companies wherever I worked also. The barriers to buy in, especially from the procurement department, they look for the cost, you know. Although one company works better in ESG or sustainability, the other company, they don't much focus on the sustainability front. But the thing is, cost plays a vital role. So based upon that only they'll buy the procurement decides, you know, based upon the cost of that product only they'll buy. So bringing sustainability as a parameter, preparing policies and, you know, establishing best practices, you know, just to see the cost also as an important one. How much we need to give importance for sustainability, a bit of compromising on the cost is a little bit a challenge and a barrier to really go into scope 3 kind of thing, especially working with procurement function. Yeah.
That's really interesting, Ravi Kiran. Thank you. I wonder, go ahead, come on in. Any other thoughts around barriers?
So Courtney, this question is towards scope 1 or it's for the entire scope 1, 2, and 3?
It's for, you can just buy-in for greenhouse gas emissions accounting broadly.
I think it has to be then again looked into different scopes.
Okay.
If you look at scope 1 and scope 2, there is a clear-cut buy-in from your organization because there is a clear benefit. The moment you move towards fossil fuel to renewable energy, again, India has different states with different policies, but still at a larger level, if you're able to clearly put in a return on investment. So scope 1 and scope 2, I don't think in most organizations there would be a cost aspect. From a scope 3 perspective, definitely, yes, I echo what Ravi has said in terms of, I mean, if you have to move towards a sustainable raw material or moving towards EV adoption, then again, cost is a critical factor because you don't have a clear-cut mature technology which gives you a right return on investment. The other way to look at this is also is in terms of I recall your slide which you mentioned, right? Customer, investors, regulators. So most of the senior leadership in multiple organizations are not aware of the push which happens between different parties or key stakeholders which influence business sustainability decisions. The point which you highlighted in terms of different countries like Sweden, UK already having a green procurement policy. So I think that's a barrier, right? In terms of understanding level. So you don't have a right person in the organization going and telling the leadership that this is something which is coming up in 2 years' time, it's going to hit you badly. So you need to be prepared in advance. the point around product carbon level emissions, right? So those are something which I think from a barrier point of view is more in terms of you're not aware of it. You're not, I mean, the leadership is not aware of it. So I would say that would be a barrier.
Mm. That's helpful. That's helpful context. A couple thoughts just from my side. One, on the cost question with procurement, one of the things I'm seeing with healthcare systems when they're bringing green procurement into their requirements was in Norway specifically, they weighted environmental considerations 30% of their decision-making process. So of the tender that they had for antibiotics, they had 30% weighting for environmental considerations. And what they actually found was they were able to secure supply easier and more directly by adding environmental in addition to price, because previously it was just race to the bottom pricing. But actually bringing environmental criteria allowed them to secure supply in their market for antibiotics. So I know that there's quite a competitive landscape with procurement, which is why cost is such a challenge. But I wonder if there's also using some of the examples that are being done by healthcare systems as a way to evidence that actually it could help, you know, with resilience of supply of some of the ingredients coming into this to the APIs or to the finished drug products, for example, when you're operating. So I think one of the things that I'm thinking as an output from this is maybe we can help create that awareness through a market summary report almost to help with your second point that you've made there, which is the leadership not being aware of these emerging drivers from a commercial perspective or from a regulatory perspective, and summarizing those effectively so that you can use it for internal awareness raising. So it's not just coming from your voice, but it's coming from, you know, an independent voice potentially as well.
So Rajesh here, so I have 3 points to make, right? The first point is that on suppliers, right? The question is that what is in it for them? We have a wide range of suppliers, right from very small scale to the big suppliers coming from European market. So it's easy to target people or the suppliers who come from European, but there are small suppliers, MSMEs working in India. What is in it for them for a buy-in, right? So the second is that pharma is a regulated market. For any change to make, there's a certain life cycle. It's not easy that I get a sustainable packaging today and I can introduce in the market down 6 months. There's a huge validation process which goes through, and then you have to get the approval. Even if I have to change it, for example, a propellant, it's going to be a 3 to 5 years journey, right? And it's not easy. And I don't know, after 5 years also, you're going to get approval for that because that's how US FDA works, right? Right. So that's the second barrier, typically in a pharma industry, where any change which requires a regulatory approval has its own life cycle to get approvals, right? And the last thing is that let's take the example of any organization in India. I'm taking a typical Indian perspective, not European perspective, where they are quite
Yes,
matured.
please. That's the point, Rajesh. Good.
Right?
Yes.
What impact does this rating is creating to me? So the question the board asks is that tomorrow, if I have a DGSA score of 79 and it goes to 70, how many investors are going to back out? Right? I don't think, because we have gone up and down and have never seen an investor really losing confidence in any pharma industry, at least in India. Right? So the question is that then why should we go behind rating agencies by signing for SBTI, by signing for CDP? Right? So what's in it for me? All this comes at a cost, right? Nothing is free. There's no free lunch in this world. Right? So what is in it for me that, understand that we have a metric which says that my DGSS score comes from 79 to 75, my CDP score goes from B minus to C. This much amount of investors are going to back out. Then that's a real data to prove. But till we don't have that data in hand, we are running helter-skelter behind scores with no meaningful benefit. And that's what, it's very difficult to buy in at the top management.
That's helpful, Rajesh. And I've heard similar feedback about, if the score goes down, actually, are there implications of that score going down from other organizations I've been speaking with? I think there are some programs that seems like SBTI that seems to have, universal buy-in at the license holder level to align to SBTI. But to your point, is there any ramifications actually happening if you don't? I haven't seen that yet. So it's a fair challenge, Rajesh. And to your point, if I may just follow up with a question, when you are making those business cases internally for allocation of budget or resources, what are you putting in those cases? What evidence are you putting to warrant the allocation of financial or resources?
Yeah, so when it comes to the business case or in a budget allocation, normally what happens, the board or the management is what would be the ROI when we do some capex or any other requirement. Okay, so is it a part of an again like it's in a 12 months or in a 16 months? So based on that, like whereas management takes a decision. As I echo with Rajesh, so there's no specific driving factor. Okay, so, whereas the board or the management thinks about buying in whether we need to go with all the emissions or scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 or not. So, as I see, when we move from 60 to 80 or 80 to 60, okay, it is the same version. It doesn't play any much in an organization point of view. Okay, whereas the client and everything that they see like as an GM in all the other markets. Okay, but with respect to the scoring perspective, be it like on a CDP or on a DGSI or on a EcoRDC, it is not on a prerequisite. It is not a driving factor as of now. As such, like there are new regulations which are coming up like BRSR and other things. Example, okay. Now I think going forward it may play something, but as of now, that is the only the barrier which we see now.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that in several cases that, once it becomes regulation, the ROI immediately happens. But the softer drivers are sometimes hard to actually show that return on the investment to the board level.
So, Courtney, there should be a unified chain of command, right? What we are having is different commands coming from different countries, right? Unless until unifies into a common standard, we have these challenges. I'll tell you an example. CDP rating is not recognized by SEBI in India, right? So why should I go for CDP? So if I go for a green loan or something, SEBI says that no, CDP is not valid. Now, if I come to NHS, they ask for CDP, right? So an organization like us, where I have businesses across the universe and managing challenges specific to countries is a huge challenge for sustainability professionals like us. So unless and
Yes.
until, I know it's a muddy world as of now, right? But unless and until there's a unified code or unified command, whatever you can say comes in, we'll still have these struggles in place.
I think you're right, Rajesh. And we're going to talk about one global standard that seems to be growing legs, but on a product level life cycle assessment. But all of these different rating systems are popping out of everywhere. It seems to me, just to go back to this slide here, from a license holder perspective, on the left-hand side, it does seem that SBTI is the rating that they're looking for to align behind. But to your point, the health systems, NHS is CDP, the financial investment community has the SASB one. So it's not universal. I'm not trying to insinuate by any means that it is universal. It's not, which is part of the challenge. I agree.
So even for SBTI, Koti, sorry to extend this further.
Please.
I mean, what will happen if I don't sign for SBTI? I don't think this is going to be investor confidence losing. No. What I'm essentially going to lose is a certain score in my DGSI or a CDP, right? So there is no force for me to sign for SBTI unless and until if there's a peer pressure.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like with the license holders who are requiring SBTI, I still haven't seen any negative ramifications that happen if you don't align to it. So I agree that there is. So what if you don't? There is no answer to that question yet.
But I'll put the other way around. I think the alternate ramification is that if I sign off and if I don't meet the criteria. I have heard that around 200 odd companies were thrown out of DGSI by DGSI, right? Which creates a rather bad remark in the press rather than not joining SBTI. So you have to weigh the risk whether you join SBTI and then get thrown out of DGSI, or you want to keep an arm's length and then wait how the world is moving and then sign for SBTI.
I don't even know DGSI. That's a new one for me, Rajesh.
Yeah, there were 200 odd companies who opted out. Some of them opted out, and some of them DGSI removed from the DGSI list last year. So 200 odd companies.
Right. Oh, yeah, the Dow Jones. Okay. Yeah.
So it creates a negative publicity in the market, right? So organization will think twice that, which is the greater risk? Should I sign? Or after I sign, I, get a bad publicity because DGSI is asking us to go out. Right. In fact, I did not know that some of the companies signed, but I came to know about the company when they were thrown out of DGSI. So they became infamous out of that. So there are a lot of risk in that. Where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. So you have to choose which one.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful clarification, Rajesh, and a good perspective, because I think that is the dilemma that you face ultimately is, well, where do you align and what benefits do you get, or what ramifications do you get if you don't? Yeah, it's the complexity around this whole topic. I think I'm going to move us on to the next section. It's been a great discussion. I really appreciate everyone jumping in. Thank you. So if I can, Ishan, I think we all probably know scope 1, 2, and 3, but just for those who may be newer to the topic, if you don't mind detailing this.
Yeah, sure, Courtney. Even I was also listening very curiously to the discussion, which is highlighted by some of the participants, some of the representative of companies in the global space. So even these days, what I have also this also came to my notice that a lot of companies, rather than going for a science-based target, signing up and getting along with their journey, they also are shifting their focus towards this ISO standards, be it IWA guidelines for net zero, which is a kind of voluntary. Even SBTI is also voluntary, but that something is coming from the pressure, sometimes from the clients, from the stakeholders, that because they have taken the SBTI target, so they want the supply chain also to be taking SBTI target. Why this is coming up very aggressively? Because the most of the carbon emissions for the pharma sector space comes from the scope 3 part. So if we see the pharmaceutical companies, their 75 to 90% contribution to the GHG emission is coming from scope 3. And when we look into SBTI kind of guidance, they say that if your emissions, carbon emissions of scope 3 is more than 40 odd percent, you have to include them in the targets. And that's a very gray area how to actually take up the decarbonization journey there. And there is no other alternative than that you push your major suppliers or the supply chain, that you also take up the SBTI target submission, and then you also follow us in the journey. So it's a kind of cascading of where one company starts and they are trying to ask their suppliers to join in their SBTI. And that's when the companies are not able to match up the year-on-year reductions, and that's what Mr. Rajesh mentioned about getting themselves out from the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices too. That's quite relatable, and a lot of companies keep on asking about what about the ISO standards, where not lot of capex or capital expenses are involved, and just following these standards and moving towards on a natural pace. So that, because sustainability is a journey, we are not here to look into like immediate results in a 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, but ultimate goal is to actually come on that journey by having a goal by 2050, 2060, to at least showcase the progress as the technology is evolving, as the market is evolving. So that's something I wanted to add up. But yeah, when it comes to scope 3 part,
sorry,
as I mentioned,
just a clarification. I think I mentioned we're taken out of DGSI. It's not DGSI, it's from SBTI. I stand corrected. If I said DGSI, I stand corrected.
Fine. So yeah, so when it comes to scope 3, the majority, as I mentioned, coming from the scope 3 part for pharma sector, be it your key starting material, be it your chemical intermediaries, be it your cutting, if you can go to the previous slide. Yeah, this one. Be it your KSM purchase, be it your intermediary, be it your API, be it your cold logistics, they all fall it in your scope 3 part. Whatever is not in directly control of your organization. When it comes to scope 1, that's something which you are making the emissions within your plant, within your organization, that is directly in the control or ownership of that organization, like fuel burning in the boilers, like diesel for backup generators, etc., that will fall in your scope 1. When it comes to the scope 2, it's majority of the time it's the electricity that you purchase from local market, from outside, from the local grid. And when it comes to the scope 3, which is subdivided into 15 niche categories, starting from purchase goods and services, that's the carbon footprint of the raw material or the packaging that you are purchasing from your suppliers. And there it's very much required for increasing the supplier awareness as well. I came up to the case that when I was delivering a training on carbon emissions to one of the pharma companies itself, they when we started the session, one of the gentlemen came up with a question that we are trying to look into the generative AI chat GPT, asking them our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and we are calculating from there as well, since they were just beginning it. And but once the 2 days course has been ended on this carbon emissions using the language of the GHG or the ISO 14064 Part 1 standard, they actually realize that they have not mapped even the carbon emissions correctly. So this kind of lack of awareness at the supply chain end is somewhat is something to be mapped in. And when it comes to Indian context, where BRSR reporting is getting mandatory for 1,000 listed companies, the next eye of SEBI is on the value chain of those companies in that listed names. So although it's not mandatory, it's still voluntary only, but that's where the SEBI is eyeing. Now we have targeted the listed companies, and then we will involve the value chain partners to create an awareness at everywhere, at least at the scope 1, 2, and 3. People start getting accounting it and reporting it. So yeah, this is about the scope 3 part, and we can move to the next slide, Courtney. Yeah, so we have covered this. Courtney has mentioned about majority is coming from the scope 3 side of it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ishan. That's helpful just to make sure we're all kind of at the same level playing field here with awareness of where the scope 1 and 2 before we get into this discussion. So again, we had some really interesting data come up to try to understand maturity around the confidence in hotspots, the reduction strategies and technology being used to account for scope 1, 2 versus scope 3. And so we have some data here that again is from the survey results that we commissioned. So I would say it's interesting from a confidence in where the hotspots are. So we can talk about accounting, but ultimately the whole goal of accounting is to understand where the hotspots are and how you reduce them. So what I found quite interesting from scope 1 and 2, and this goes with the one comment that was made earlier, is that 46% are confident in or very confident in scope 1 and 2 accounting and where the hotspots are. 34% for scope 1 and 2 indicate that they are still learning or they're uncertain where hotspots are. So there's a good almost 50% who are confident or very confident for scope 1 and 2, and about 34% who are still learning or uncertain. For scope 3, it changes. So only about 27% are confident or very confident where hotspots are for scope 3 emissions, and 50% indicate that they are still learning or uncertain. So I think there's a obvious, and we know this, but it's interesting just to see the statistics to back up the assumptions that I think everyone is saying. The other thing we found interesting was around the reduction strategies. So if you've done accounting, how are you working to reduce? So we found for scope 1 and 2, 50% roughly have started implementing reduction strategies, but nearly 20% have not. For scope 3, we see that 37% have started implementing reduction strategies, but 33% indicated that they have not. So it's definitely more work is being done on reducing where you have direct control, which again makes sense with scope 1 and 2. The thing I found quite interesting was around the adoption of technology and where and how to make that systematic. So all of the scopes, so for both 1, 2, and 3, 35% of companies indicated they have adopted a technological solution to actually account and report data at large for their greenhouse gas emissions accounting. And about 38% said that they have not implemented technology. So I guess we have about a third who have implemented technology. So it does show, I think, a little bit of indication of where the industry is in India from a maturity perspective overall related to scope 1 and 2. Prashant, if I can maybe turn over to you to start the discussions here.
I think,
Yeah.
Curtin, before we start the question, if you can go back to the previous slide, where you have mentioned the technology used, one interesting thing which comes to my mind also to explain that I was doing the sustainability report verification for one of the companies where I came to understand that they have shifted from Excel based consolidation to a technological platform in a journey of 3 to 4 years. So what I tried, so right now they are using the technology platform where all the plants data which are there in Pan India, they are uploading on that platform, and that particular platform is calculating footprints and generating trends, showing them the reports whether it is aligns with the requirements of requirements of the ISO or the BRSR or not. So these kind of things happening, but I analyzed that the organizations who have started by the Excel practice, they have a better understanding on the carbon emissions or ESG part because they have started by doing by themselves of their own rather than immediately shifting to a technology tool. So those organizations who have came up with the idea of getting the tool on board and just outsource it, they were struggling a little bit comparing to the organizations who have started with the Excel based accounting within their hands, and then with the time for the use of technology better use, they have shifted towards those existing tools these days. So that's what I wanted to just highlight it over here. Yeah, over to Dr. Prashant.
Yeah, Ishan, thank you so much. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate on the feedback that was given for the first question. I just want to list down the bullets so that for these questions also we are expecting similar type of answers. So the barriers that were mentioned was costing, awareness for the leadership, return on investment, and there should be a common command, and should not be different methods of validation, and there should be a common regulatory requirements, and many other rating agencies also need to come together and maybe come up with a common standard, or maybe based on the common standard they should rate them instead of having multiple validation agencies. So that was a great insight for the barriers. So similarly, we expect all the dignitaries to kind of give us these points so that we can probably work and help you in overcoming these barriers. So coming to the key questions on scope 1, 2, and 3. How mature are your programs so far? Do you have idea on hotspots which are known across operations and which help you kind of reduction strategies are in place? And are you looking for technology to systematically embed these things into it, which Ishan has answered to some extent? And then is there any organizational buy-in, or is there any challenge in organizational buy-in? So these are the three questions probably, and then we can move to the scope 3. For scope 1 and 2, we request all the delegates to kindly give your feedback on this.
See, for scope 1 and 2, my experience is really matured with respect to implementation of especially scope 2, wherever renewable energy, everything, we can use it, organizations coming forward and they're going ahead. Coming to the scope 1, still the gap is like, for the DG sets, we cannot replace with a biofuel kind of thing. That's a big challenge. And many of the times, I've heard consultants also coming, they say, why can't you go for electrical boilers? So it's really a challenge buy-in, frankly speaking, because not yet established, very costly also. Few in India somewhere, Thermax installed somewhere, but there is no real technology established and straight away it can be implemented. That's the real challenge, whatever we are facing right now. Technology point of view, especially for scope one, still a challenge to really implement 100%.
Those are really concrete examples. Thanks, Ravi. I appreciate that deep level of detail. Has anyone else experienced similar challenges?
So, hi. With respect to the hotspot, like on a scope one and scope two, we do have identified, like in working towards that. The main barrier which we do see is, on a scope two front, is with the state regulations, because some of the states have a good like regulations on mainly the renewable type of energies in India. Okay, so whereas they give a permissions for renewables, be it wind or solar. Okay, but some of the states there is some back step on a renewable energy. So that is again a challenge from the state government point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about around that as well from renewable energy availability and being able to access it. So thanks, Vishnu. That's helpful. I also really want to, I mean, we talked a little bit in the last session around the difficulty, or the last question category was the difficulty of scope 3 and getting the balance with cost. I was, and in the next section around scope 3, I was really wanting to understand like what approach you're taking, because I see two different approaches. One, a very much a top down, give us the data from the suppliers, really requesting a data-driven approach. Or a second approach is more of a kind of training, engaging, capacity building type of approach with your suppliers. Do you mind detailing or which approach you're taking when trying to get information on scope 3 with your suppliers?
So I would rather say that pharma takes an hybrid approach, right? So one is on value-based emissions, and for we have also matured suppliers who have better data than us. Let's accept that they have better data than us, right? Few of the challenges is getting data from China, right? Chinese companies, they don't provide data at all, right? So we just need to get into revenue based and have some calculations and get it, right? So most of the pharma companies, I trust that they take a hybrid approach of a few companies, they have the real data, and then rest are based on revenue based or procurement based approach what we take, right? So the focus will be more on educating the suppliers, having a physical assessment, having a criteria of high, medium, low, and bringing a high risk supplier to a low risk supplier over a period of time. But some of the challenges would be in terms of monopolistic suppliers, right? Even if it's a high risk category, I can't stop the business from running, because if I ask the monopolistic supplier that I don't want to deal with you, then your business is closed.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the challenges but in scope 1 and 2, I'm coming back to the other question on scope 1 and scope 2. I can't limit myself saying that I'm an Indian based company and my scope 1 and scope 2 is limited to India, right? I need to understand what's the solar or wind or clean energy landscape beyond India. And there lies the challenge, right? So a typical payback of a solar system in India may not work in the US. I just calculated for the US plant. The payback is 4 to 5 years of payback, right? My finance said that I will not accept anything which is less than 3 years.
Right.
Right. So then comes that, do you want to be a sustainability leader by, thumping your chest and saying that irrespective of my, payback calculation, I will go and invest in sustainability? Is the business ready to do that? That's the challenge which sustainability faces, right? So India, it's relatively easy because there are service providers. We may get a payback, because the cost of investment is comparatively low, whether you have a model of boot or non-boot or whatever model. But the landscape completely changes if we go beyond the boundaries of India.
That's helpful, Rajesh. I appreciate that. I think it's also important to know that while in India there is availability and return possible, but also we're dealing with global operations where the returns vary. And so understanding where you invest and where you don't invest based on the returns is a challenge. That's a good perspective, especially from your organization acting truly global.
A lot of organizations, when it comes to their scope 2 part, lot of because of such requirements, when the market is not supportive of ROI, may not be coming, they also trying to invest in the passive instruments like REC certificates, renewable energy certificates that are traded on the energy markets as well. But still, that's a passive kind of investment. If we look into the bundled or the active investment, those the options which are available is either you have it on the capex kind of plant which is installed on your premises within your plant's rooftop, or you invest in a third party power purchase agreement or a group captive that gives you decent ROI, as well as that gives you a decent amount of renewable energy contribution. But yeah, it definitely varies from country to country. So organization takes this blended approach that in the countries like where they are not getting this ROI and they still have committed for RE100 or those kind of targets, they still go on buying the international RECs from the energy exchanges to showcase their commitment. And wherever they have this availability of solar installation or getting into a power purchase agreement with a ROI within the stipulated time, which is agreed by their board or by their leadership, they are taking steps accordingly. So they are mixing that approach of going for RE with capex or going for a passive instrument like renewable energy certificates for a scope 2. And when it comes to scope 3, the because when it comes to scope 3, the indirect emissions of my organization is direct emission of someone other organization. The direct emission of my supplier is becoming my indirect emission. So it's always a double accounting case that somebody is reporting in his direct emission, I am reporting in my indirect emission. So the awareness and capacity building at the supply chain side is very becoming very important, because some of the companies, they are definitely doing very good in terms of their data management, but some of the companies which are yet to start in terms of what activities to be captured, how the scope needs to be clearly defined under scope 1 and 2. Because if they are not accounting it clearly, which is a fundamental step, they won't be able to take even a smaller actions as well. So the capacity building part on the scope 3 becomes very important for the client organization as well as their supply chain. So yeah, but
Thanks, Ishan. That's a really good point. That's the kind of point I want to drill down on is the challenge with capacity building and education is scale, right? How do you scale reaching the different suppliers? Would there be interest in like a collective training effort for Indian-based tier 2 suppliers, where actually we work as this collective group to identify certain regions where there's a high concentration, and we actually set up some collaborative funding to train and build capacity within suppliers across the industry rather than individually doing that? Just didn't know if anyone has any kind of knee-jerk reactions to if we were to set something like that up, the level of interest.
No, we can do that. Sorry.
Please. Yeah, please, Mr. Rajesh, please go ahead.
No, actually, say it's a good suggestion, but the primary question is that we should be able to answer the question, what's in it for me? Right? If you don't answer that question, if I am a business person, I will not invest.
Sure.
Right? So I'm sure that most of the MSMEs or SMEs, I'm sure that they might be doing energy conservation, right? Because that's a part of their cost, not because of sustainability, but at least to reduce the the utility cost of it, right? We just need to teach them that you are already doing it. We just need to convert that into GHG emissions. That's it. right? So that's the capacity building we should do. That you're already doing it. We will help you to convert that into GHG emissions.
I think that that's helpful. I think there's to your point of what would be in it for you. I think it's probably twofold. One, being able to scale your engagement with suppliers across many rather than just one-to-one. But then secondly, I think if there was a way to then subsequently collect data as a result of the training in some way, so that there was almost this ongoing collection, advice or capacity building that happens subsequent to the initial training. That's kind of the thinking we've done. We've done it quite a lot in the social and ethical human rights space, where we actually do kind of regional trainings in this industry to try to bring capacity up to a certain level within supplier bases. And it helps when you have multiple tier one companies like the ones here on this call kind of buying in and to it to then build and drive adoption of it at a regional supplier level. But we could try to build the case stronger, Rajesh. That's just my kind of initial thoughts back to you.
No, so the only request is that it can be PSI, it can be BSI, that will you be able to converge all the Indian pharma companies to make a draft like what other companies have done, right? And then ask the suppliers saying that, please come and publish your numbers. We will help you out, right?
Yeah.
We will help you on capacity building. We will provide you green loans or whatever it is, depending on whatever it is, and different companies. Unless and until all the pharma companies come together, right, and at least address to the common suppliers, that will be a leapfrogging exercise rather than individual pharma companies then going and asking the suppliers to do whatever they want.
Yeah, sure. Because I'm running an equivalent session in China on the 23rd of June. I'm going to be in Shanghai, and we've got about 20 companies signed up to do a similar workshop to try to understand what's happening in the China supply chain. Because I keep hearing it's a bit of the black hole, and there isn't any data coming out of there. So I just wonder if the results of both this workshop and that workshop combined may allow for such opportunity through groups like PSCI. But the challenge is there are no tutors, right? There are no course material yet, really. So there's maybe an opportunity for collaboration there that we're looking to explore. Thanks for the initial feedback. Any other feedback before? There's one more section we have in the final 15 minutes.
I'll just make one point, Courtney, that within the capacity building, the trainings or the discussions should always be in a way that after the workshop or any kind of that event gets over, they are able to do the calculation. So maybe the 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 capacity building on this particular standards, be it ISO or GHG protocol, because ultimately someone has to follow a standard approach only.
Yeah, exactly.
Which gives them a structured way, and that's the only thing which is accepted by the stakeholders, be it regulators, be it other customers. So it should be based upon some practical examples where they can use those kind of templates created in alignment with ISO or GHG, which they can use further, and they can do some practical calculations by themselves. So rather than only focusing on what standard wants in terms of subjective discussions or clause wise, it should be based upon some practical templates as well, relevant to the pharma industry, that what is the major hotspot for you, because it's not expected to focus upon carbon emission happening from fire extinguisher leaks, because that's a very minor part. So companies start measuring that areas as well, but that's not a hotspot. The hotspot is
thanks, Ishan. It's a good point of it being practical and template based and specific to the industry. I agree completely.
Just to add here, only one point. We have conducted one capacity building for suppliers. The learning is like, they have sent the EHS, mostly the EHS team for the workshop. And we try to explain them the calculations kind of thing, scope 1, scope 2 kind of thing, all the GHG kind of thing. The level of engineering department understanding, they don't have that, So my learning is, appropriate participation also from cross-functional departments also plays a vital role. Else, it will be just they'll come and they'll just listen and go. As you rightly said, a bit of technical part somebody should understand. So that is missing when we conduct capacity building also. That's a learning for me also. Yeah.
It's a good point, Ravi. It's not just the people who are responsible, but also the people they need to engage to get the data as well, like the engineering team, for example. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
When we go for an scope 3, like we go with a mixed approach. One is again a spend basis, and again on a activity specific actually. Okay, we do also identify the hotspots and to work on that. But pertaining to the suppliers front, okay, even after post awareness, okay, we don't get like much inputs on both the emissions front. Even after regular follow-ups, we do get, but like how to move from X to Y is a big challenge. Okay, whereas the supplier, the buy-in will be a challenge. Why I need to invest from X to Y? Okay, if there is no, then okay, I'll go with the other guy. Okay, why I need to invest as of now? Because as of now, there is no regulation. Okay, whereas if my Z customer goes, then I'll have other customer like as an A or B. Okay, why I need to invest as of now? Because otherwise, like PAT or profit after these things will be also like it will be like declined. So whereas the MSMEs or smaller customers, smaller suppliers thinks in that mode actually.
Thanks, Vishnu. It's also really helpful feedback on where and how to focus on the hotspots rather than just generics. So thank you. Okay, in the final section, just in the final 10 minutes, first of all, thanks. That was a really helpful discussion. I'm really appreciative of everyone's feedback there. I think maybe, Ishan, can you take this slide on just for a couple minutes and then we'll go into the data that we gathered from this section?
Yeah, sure, Courtney. So when it comes to the carbon accounting, we have two levels of accounting. One is the organizational level and one is the product level carbon footprinting. Organizational level accounting, which is we discussed in one of these slides where scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 part we had a discussion upon. So this includes all the elements, be it your refrigerant leaks, be it your employee commute, business commute part, and that is one of the fundamental activity before going for any further actions on carbon reductions or taking any further targets related to carbon emissions. And the other category is product level footprinting, which is organizations are using it as a tool to understand the carbon emissions which are happening in the unit processes for a particular product. Generally, this is a product which the product they categorize based upon the highest revenue contributor for the organization, the top 10, and maybe their client is asking information about the LCA, life cycle assessment of that product. So they decide based upon some of those factors. When it comes to product level, it becomes important for you to understand the breakup of the life cycle stages of your product, and which starts with either buying the key starting materials, the KSM, then producing API, then formulators doing their job, then packaging and the distribution. So within the unit processes, what are the carbon emission hotspots? Like for PCF itself, I'll try to quote one example from AstraZeneca. They they not they came up with an idea of the smart next generation inhalers. uh, yeah. So in their inhalers, when they did the product carbon footprint of their product, they came to understand that 90% of the inhalers carbon footprint is coming from the propellant which is used during the use phase. So they shifted their attention to the product use rather than just manufacturing or packaging part, and they worked upon shifting from HFA 134A to HFA 152A, uh, which is more optimized in terms of reducing their carbon emissions during the use phase of their product. So PCF kind of, these are the tools which organizations can use at least to make them aware about what are the areas where they have to actually put their brains in. Maybe the requirements are not right now, but maybe you might have these requirements in near future. So it's sustainability is about better making you ready for the future sustainability related risk on the businesses as well. So a lot of companies are using these standards to get them educated and understand the standard requirement to account it correctly. Yeah. So yes, Katni, this can we
Thank
see
you. That's
some.
helpful. I mean, I think going
Sure.
to that point of standardization, there is now a standard that's being drafted. It's out for public consultation right now. That is specific to the pharmaceutical sector and doing product level environmental footprinting. So how to do an LCA, life cycle assessment, on drugs, different product categories. So what are the rules for product categories and small molecules and large molecules and biologics? And there's actually a set of product category rules now that have been defined and drafted. It's been involvement of the top 9 global pharma companies, the generics industry, the UK government, NHS England, and also academics, regulators, consultancies, and as a part of the steering group. So it's being drafted now, out for public consultation currently, if you would like to feed into it. But I think it's going to try to help accelerate what we found out in the process of the surveys related to product level carbon footprinting compared to organizational level. So we saw actually that 48% see benefits of having a standardized methodology. So we are working towards achieving that through the standard I just mentioned, PAS 2090. I'll put a link out as a follow-up to this with a link to the consultation process if you'd like to feed in. We found a fairly low level of focus on life cycle assessments for carbon footprinting. Only 30% say that they're doing LCAs for 0 to 3 products. One company indicated that they're doing it for 4 to 7 products annually, and another one said 8 to 15. So I guess from a maturity perspective, there's a lot of room to grow here from a product level carbon footprinting. And again, going back to the drivers on the first few slides, it's a emerging driver. I think there are healthcare systems who are either currently asking for this or going to be asking for this in the near future. So I think the only 8% said that they're focusing more on product level carbon footprinting than organizational, and 12% say that equal efforts are being placed on both. So I think we won't necessarily go into the questions because of time, but I do think we have a couple final polls and then I'll close us out. So Shivendra, do you mind if we launch poll 3?
Just give me 1 second.
Thank you. So the question is related to, does your organization require support in understanding organizational or product level carbon footprinting? We give everyone a minute to respond. Okay, maybe if we can have the results, Shivendra.
So as of now, we have 8 responses, and I can see majority of people, they are looking up for the support for the both levels.
Okay. Thanks, Shivendra. That's helpful. It just is good for us to understand kind of where support is needed. I think the final question, and then we'll close out, is you've seen that we've produced lots of statistics here from the survey. The question that we have here is, would you like to receive a company-specific benchmark report that shows where you have answered the survey compared to where the industry average is across the 23 organizations that have responded to this? So do you think that A would be helpful for internal buy-in, B, would be helpful to know where you compare against your peers, or C, not useful for your organization. So if you don't mind, just trying to understand if producing these benchmark reports to show where you are as an organization compared to your peers in India, whether or not that would prove to be valuable. So if you don't mind answering this last poll question, and then we're going to allow you to hopefully get a nice cup of tea before your final next meeting. Great. I see some people saying, yeah, it would be useful to understand how you compare against your peers as the, and no one's saying it's not useful. So I think that's a positive response that we'll work to try to put together a market analysis report like we talked about to outline some of these drivers, but also a bit of a maturity benchmark to showcase where you are compared to some of your peers in the industry. So final word for me is thank you very much for participation. Thanks Ishan and Prashant for your co-facilitation in this, and very much appreciate everyone's views and perspectives here. Again, none of the commentary will be attributed to any one individual organization in the report out. We're just going to be using the amalgamated data to showcase where some of the maturity of where the industry is now. So, and also see where we can potentially drive collaborative action, given our presence across the country. So thanks everyone again. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you on the next workshop and coming soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Appreciate
being
it.
here, audience. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
अरे सर, ये नहीं तो मैं
किधर से जा रही है